Hello, all, and welcome to New Plaza's series of classic film talkbacks. I'm Norma Levy, president of New Plaza, a nonprofit showing independent and foreign films. Today's film is a fabulous 1967 neo-noir film called Le Samouraï, starring Alain Delon, who portrays an assassin. We wish to thank Claudine Baker, a longtime supporter of New Plaza, who has generously sponsored this film and worked with Gary Palmucci, our curator, to choose it. Thank you, Claudine. Gary will be joined in this talkback by his good friend, Max Alvarez, the noted film historian. I hope you enjoy it, and it's my great pleasure now to turn this over to Gary.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Another terrific turnout, our first Monday night installment of the program. This is a film that I really took particular pleasure in watching again. I'd last seen it at the Museum of the Moving Image in Astoria with my son about 20 years ago, and it's a classic case of a foreign film that literally took decades to be appreciated in America. It was originally released, believe it or not, in the early 1970s, dubbed into English, cut by 10 minutes or so, and titled The Godson, in a cynical attempt to cash in on a very popular Hollywood epic that you may recall from that same period of time. I can't imagine it pleased many mob movie addicts, and it was later available to art houses only in kind of crummy, desaturated 16 millimeter prints. It finally had a bona fide release in the late 90s, to finally full critical appreciation, followed by reissues of several other of director Jean-Pierre Melville's precision-tooled crime melodramas. I think, Max, that would be an appropriate description, right, of his oeuvre?
Absolutely. And I still scratch my head at U.S. distributors not seeing the commercial potential of Melville's films in their the years that they were made. And I've always blamed it on Variety. The columnist there, the reviewer Gene Moskowitz, who was the Paris reviewer, didn't like Melville's films. Going back to the 50s, he was always dismissing them, and he was not impressed with Le Samouraï, complained that it was too long, it doesn't have much potential for the US market. And that's a shame because it's an accessible movie despite its rather abstract narrative that takes place occasionally.
Well, right, as you're a historian of Variety, and of course the story of Gene Moskowitz, I think an American GI who somehow wound up in Paris after the war and fell into that job of reviewing foreign films in this incredible era of French film output is outrageously casual in and of itself. But you know, talent finds its own level, and I think Melville's films eventually were seen and recognized over here, starting with one called Bob Le Flambeur that he made in the mid-50s, was shown at the New York Film Festival, I think, in 1981, and was rapturously received at Alice Tully Hall, and then released by Dan Talbot in one of his theaters the following year successfully. And I think that sort of started the ball rolling. And now, ironically, just this past week, I saw an ad on the Criterion Channel. All 13 of Melville's films are being shown in a festival format this month on the channel. So everything is available suddenly.
That's fantastic news indeed, because he was a director known for primarily two types of films, the war picture and then the crime picture. And even though he was very much inspired by American popular culture, American cinema, literature, there is a distinctly European and French sensibility to even his crime pictures, such as Le Samouraï, which, yes, it's about a hitman or a professional killer, but there's so many other themes going on here that you would not see in a Hollywood picture on a similar subject. Although we did have Point Blank the same year, as you indicated to me the other day.
That's maybe a film we should put on the program here at some point. It's known well by some people, but not so much by others, and it's extraordinary in its own right. But you put together a nice little montage of moments from Le Samouraï that I think you have ready to roll here, right?
Well, what I have is when I talked about Paris on film, I did have some highlights from the metro pursuit when Jeff is being pursued by that gum-chewing policewoman. But tonight, actually, I thought we could take a look at the original, at a portion of the original trailer. It's a long one, but we're going to be taking a look at the last half of that. If you're up for that, we can run that now.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is the original French, a portion of the original French trailer for Le Samouraï. And Gary, I often say that you and I could have probably done a little better in a lot less time, but let's see how they do.
That's marketing circa 1967 in Paris.
Exactly. And this is Nathalie Delon.
Jeff Costello, personnage central d'une intrigue dramatique. A-t-il encore des amis? Le Samouraï, un film de Jean-Pierre Melville.
Raccrochez-le. Allez.
Le Samouraï, interprété par Alain Delon, François Perrier, Cathy Rosier et Nathalie Delon.
Si j'ai bien compris, vous me demandez de faire un faux témoignage, moyennant quoi je n'aurai aucun ennui. Parce que si je maintiens la vérité contre vous, alors là, je peux m'attendre à en baver. C'est bien ça?
Une histoire passionnante. Une interprétation hors de pair. Une réalisation magistrale. Un film exceptionnel.
Il vient de sortir de l'immeuble et a pris le métro.
Suivez-le. Enfin, essayez.
Le Samouraï, un film de Jean-Pierre Melville. Prochainement sur cet écran.
Well, I will say this, the nice thing about the older trailer is they do mention the title of the film more than once. Unlike today, they just expect us to memorize it at the end.
Indeed. Well, Melville, obviously, as you say, fascinated with American film genres and obviously American literature as well, because he changed his name to a certain well-known American author. Apparently, sometime after I guess right after World War II, when he made his first film. He was Jean-Pierre Grumbach, I believe, originally. Right?
Exactly. He was born in Paris, but he had a fondness for Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, and so Melville, or Melville, if you prefer, became his official name as a filmmaker. We see him turning to filmmaking in 1946, and you had mentioned his political experiences during World War II. You can perhaps share some of that with us before he becomes a filmmaker.
Well, he was a member of the resistance, and I think he brought his experiences of that to one of his most well-known films, The Army of Shadows, L'Armée des Ombres, which was never formally released in America until I believe about 2005 or 2006 by Rialto Pictures, the excellent re-release distributor, still going strong. And I think it was given the best foreign film of that year, 2005 or 6, by the New York Film Critics, because it was in fact a new film, never, at least officially, never shown before in the U.S.
And that was the film that immediately followed 2 years later, Le Samouraï. And Le Samouraï, it's really two types of films, I would say, in terms of its visual look, because you have the interiors, which are a completely different style of filmmaking from the exteriors. The interiors mostly would have been filmed at Melville's own studio on the Rue de Genève that suffered a terrible fire during the production of the film. And then, of course, we had the actual practical, genuine Paris locations. So it's two filmmaking styles. Would you agree?
Yes, and he's using one of the great French cinematographers of the era, who shot many of his other pictures, and did this picture, Le Samouraï, at least in the exterior photography. His name is Henri Decaille, Decae. And this is his second appearance on our program. Actually, he shot the 400 Blows, which we showed back at what seems a long time ago now, back at the beginning of our series. A completely different film, stylistically, lots of handheld work and things seemingly caught on the fly in the streets. This film has a much more deliberate and composed look to it, and that terrific energy at the police station and in the lineup scenes and the typewriters banging away in the interrogation rooms is just something that it's kind of crackling from moment to moment. But we don't want to get too much further without talking about the star of the film, Alain Delon, who's kind of a star of New Plaza Cinema as well. A picture he made about a decade later, Monsieur Klein, was very successfully re-released last year and became probably the single most popular film we showed at the cinema, avant le déluge.
That was one of two films he made for Joseph Losey. The first in the 70s, The Assassination of Trotsky, was poorly received. But Delon, at the time he's making Le Samouraï, he's already starred in two films for Luchino Visconti, Rocco and His Brothers and The Leopard. He has already appeared in René Clément's Purple Noon.
I saw that last summer at Socrates Sculpture Park by the East River. That was a strangely appropriate spot to see that film, if our viewers know it. And of course, it was remade as The Talented Mr. Ripley about 20 years ago.
So he's already he's gotten this tremendous experience. But when Le Samouraï came out, he told an interviewer that he felt that Melville was the greatest director he had worked for. And he particularly was in awe of Melville's compositional style. And that's a big statement coming from an actor who worked for Visconti, who was known as the ultimate stylist. But we do see in the beginning, you have that amazing shot of the room where Jeff Costello is sleeping. The camera is stationary during the titles. There's some vertigo-like camera movement where the camera's zooming in and tracking back, or perhaps the other way around. And then you mentioned the police station has some wonderful compositions with the policemen sort of packed together in one room, observing the lineup, the people in the audience. And just a tremendous eye for detail.
Everything in the subway seems to have like a dreamlike elegance to it. You know, that's not like now that you normally see in scenes like that. Certainly not in the 400 Blows.
Well, and you mentioned dreamlike because it's playing fast and loose with the era in which it was made. It was filmed in 1967, but there are deliberately retro stylistic choices that Melville and his costume team have made. Delon is clearly dressed from a previous era, with his magnificent hat and his film noir appearance that is deliberately not mod or not trendy in style. And I think some of the other fashions were deliberately not specific to the era in which they made the film.
Yes, a couple of our close associates here who lived in France during that time have confirmed that for us this past week as we were discussing it.
Now, the question is, this on the surface is a pretty simple narrative. I'm always in awe of a sound film that has extensive non-dialogue scenes, and this has a number of beautiful scenes right up through the beginning when he's stealing the car and there's no dialogue, and then that lengthy scene where the police are planting a bug in his apartment. It's a simple story, but it's not when we start to ask ourselves, what exactly is this film about? And for example, and here's a case where we can actually talk about the ending because we've all seen it. I mean, my reaction, your reaction, and others' reaction to the ending is probably going to be quite different. Where do we begin on the themes of the narrative, Gary?
Well, I think we begin at the beginning, as we were talking just before we went on the air. It seems to be in most of the things we've read about the picture this week that this so-called Code of the Samurai, taken from some book called Bushido or the Code of the Samurai, appears to be something that is fictitious, not made up by the director or his co-screenwriters. And just coincidentally, in the last few weeks, I've been reading a Japanese historical novel about the life of a samurai, and he's sort of coming of age from about age 12 to 28. And there's a passage in that book which says, which reads as follows: This is the samurai thinking to himself before going into a battle. To the universe, the death of just one man could hardly have any more significance than that of a butterfly. But in the realm of mankind, a single death could affect everything, for better or worse. Mushashi's only concern now was to die a noble death. And it seems like whatever else we may say about the ending, and I'm sure that will be debated from now till the end of the program, it does seem at the end that in that series of increasingly oblique or complicated events that play out, that Jeff's only concern at the end is in fact to die a noble death. And that's
so powerful, because my superficial reaction when I watched it again the other night was, oh, he's saving the life of a woman he's in love with, which in my theory makes no sense because he doesn't have any bullets in his gun. So your description makes more sense. And I was reading, you had brought to my attention a blogger, an Asian blogger, who was
my phone.
taking somebody's microphone is on. We might want to deal with that. There was a blogger who was taking to task some established film critics for not understanding the ending of Le Samouraï and not taking into account some of the samurai ethics that you mentioned, Gary. But even the blogger overlooked a couple of key points in the narrative, well, subtle but important points. So I feel like we're arguing about the JFK assassination in many ways, because everybody seems to have a theory. I mean, why did he sacrifice himself if the pianist was no longer in danger? Because if he was afraid that her lover was going to have her killed, well, he already killed the lover. There's so many questions.
We don't make that connection until very near the end of the picture either, when he goes into that gentleman's apartment, having been given his name by the thug who crashes into his own Delon or Jeff's own flat and reveals his name at gunpoint. And then we realize when he's in that house that this is indeed the same house in which he had been talking to the young lady much earlier in the picture, trying to determine why she had saved his life or exactly what piece of the puzzle she occupied.
Yes, and one of the critics, the blogger who was writing about it, he overlooked a little point where Jeff shows up again at that apartment to confront the boss, and he kills the boss. Well, yeah, he does. I mean, he puts on the gloves. He's certainly planning to kill the boss, but the boss whips out a gun and it was planning to shoot Jeff as well. So it's kind of almost a self-defense thing. And there's so many fascinating things when Jeff is picked up, or he drives back to the pianist's apartment from the club. They have a little talk in the car. We cut back to them. Has anything happened between them? It's a little vague. She's in her very Asian robe. She says she's going to call him back in 2 hours, but he should call her back in 2 hours when he leaves. When he calls her, she doesn't pick up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does all that mean? So in a way, we're getting into Bresson territory here. Robert Bresson. It was not what we saw.
An analogy I didn't think of.
You know, what was going on when out of camera range? What were the discussions that she had with her lover about him? And also, I didn't pick this up until I read it in this account, that one of the men present in the meeting of the bosses to discuss Jeff Costello, whether he should live or die, is the bartender at the piano bar.
Yes.
I didn't catch that the first time.
He seems to be much more than a maitre d' or whatever. Yes.
Precisely. So there's a bit of there's some abstractions going on here that I think make the film really commanding several viewings.
And Delon has this air of mystery and ambiguity about him, and almost kind of an Oriental gaze. I almost think I'm looking at Tatsuya Nakadai sometimes there in some of his close-ups, particularly towards the end of the film, probably with some deliberation by the director and the makeup department, particularly that very last long shot of him sitting at the bar before he approaches the piano at the fateful moment there at the climax.
It's despite some of the ambiguities of the climax, I found it to be very moving. It was hard to describe, where something very, very touching about how it all unfolded. Oh, and here's another thing that this this cranky blogger who was critical of some critics who wrote about the film, he talked about Jeff approaches the piano at the end, and the pianist says to him, "Why, Jeff?" And then his response is, I want to get the quote exactly right, because I was paid to. But before she says, "Why, Jeff?" she says to him, "You can't remain here." So in a way, she's wanting him to leave. She's trying to warn him that it's not safe for him. That's an important thing.
That he's surrounded by cops who are going to open fire.
So it seems that she wants to save him, he wants to save her, but he wants to sacrifice himself as well.
There's something, as they say, about particularly that last shot in the film, that kind of medium shot of the bandstand there after the deed has been done. There's something very moving beyond that, beyond the gymnastics of plot and genre there that really elevates the film.
No, because it's true. Because the minute I saw that shot you're describing, Gary, is just something inside me just tightened up. It was very, very powerful, and it was one of those things. It was hard to describe. What am I responding to exactly? But there's just these little touches that I thought were so extraordinary. I think sound design is something we take for granted and perhaps don't quite always have a understanding of for film, but you do have sound editors and sound designers, and to me this movie has one of the greatest sound designs I've ever heard.
It's a virtuoso performance.
Well, yeah, because you've got the chirping bird. It's so simple, yet it's so powerful from the very beginning. The bird, the chirping bird, and then that extraordinary moment when the police, the plainclothes cop is checking to see if his radio is working, and he turns it on, and you hear the bird chirping. Yes. What Hollywood director would have ever thought of that? That's
and then the tape recorder is running, of course, and we hear the bird chirping, because that's all that's going on for hours at a time in this stakeout that these guys are involved in.
Yes, and it's just I think now I'm having this European running thought here. Not that this is on the same artistic level, okay? So bear with me, because I know the serious French film lovers find this director tremendously annoying, Luc Besson. But when he did Léon, The Professional, Léon had a plant that he took with him everywhere. And this kind of reminded me that this professional killer has a parakeet that he loves very, very much. So this man who commits violence has this very, very sensitive thing that he keeps by him.
That sounds like an homage to Le Samouraï.
Exactly, and there have been, and it seems like there were others. And there was in 1999, Jim Jarmusch made Ghost Dog: The Way of the
Samurai. Yes,
with Forrest Whitaker. So this film clearly had an influence, even if it wasn't widely seen in the United States.
Yes, indeed, and I think that, as I said. Now other marketing entities like Criterion, they have terrific editors, and I think you can actually go on YouTube and see this beautiful montage they put together of all of Melville's films appearing on their channel this month, and I would say some of the two or three best ones I would recommend for continuing with, if you enjoyed Le Samouraï, Bob Le Flambeur, Le Dulot. Do you have other favorites?
Well, you had mentioned Le Deuxième Souffle.
Second Breath. That's right.
And then, of course, I love Army of Shadows. It's a different kind of film, but it is so engrossing. He inspired the Nouvelle Vague, the French New Wave, people like Godard, but he didn't make their kinds of movies. He was more of a formalist, a classicist in his style. I think he considered himself much more reactionary politically, perhaps, but he was very much an inspiration because of the production economy, of the economy he brought to his productions, and he had a tremendous amount of control. He had this studio that he made a lot of Le Samouraï out of, had been his studio for 14 years until this fire, which may have been arson, it was kind of suspect when it happened. And they had to complete the film at other locations in 1967 before it finally came out in the fall of 1967. But he had a lot of control.
You mentioned his mentoring of some of the Nouvelle Vague directors as well. He actually appears briefly but famously in Godard's Breathless, which is marking its 60th anniversary this year. And he appears as a pretentious author who was being interviewed by Gene Seberg and several other journalists. And at one point, either she or one of the other ones asked him, what is your ultimate desire in life, or the thing you'd like most? And he says, to become immortal and then to die. That's his...
And he had also, he'd even appeared in one of his own films, which had some wonderful locations in New York City called Two Men from Manhattan, which naturally didn't get here until much later. But crime is really something that he had a very strong sensibility for. And this does have all the elements of a good crime picture. The pursuits through the subway, where he seems to be constantly aware that he is being followed. The vivid uses of Paris locations, although in a much different way than we had seen in the 400 Blows. I didn't get the impression these were candid filming of Paris. This was all very more prepared and controlled than what Truffaut and Godard were doing in the 50s and early 60s.
Other than the subway and the scenes in the car, I guess there's some sort of scenes where he's walking around or whatever. But as you say, it's he's usually on vehicles of conveyance or a very specific direction to wherever he's headed.
Absolutely, and then the other actors in the film, you had, of course, Delon's wife appearing as the, not technically a prostitute, but the woman his girlfriend who's serving as his alibi. They're going to be separated not long after the film gets completed. And then Cathy Rosier was a Martinique model, only in her about 20 years of age when she was cast in this, her first film. And she's going to make about 8 other films and some television work until she passes away far too young in the early 2000s. But she had a very powerful presence, I thought, even though she was not given a lot of dialogue.
Well, both women, I think, are very, very poignant and have some kind of subtle power, each of them. And I think that's part of the cumulative effect you're describing of sort of being, grabbed by the ventricles there, at the very end of things.
And the scene with I guess Jane's character played by Nathalie Delon, the scene where the homicide commissioner pays her a visit and he's playing all his French police tricks with her, trying to scare her about the thought of going to prison if she's perjuring herself or protecting him.
Accessory to murder.
Accessory, and she's having none of that. And she's and when Jeff visits her en route to his fatal, his finale at the piano bar, she says, she's indicating that she suspects she loves him more than he loves her. But on the other hand, he is seeing her before he goes to his death. So there has to be some very deep-rooted feelings for her from him.
I can see that we're getting a lot of participant comments here, that there's lots of theories and questions that are going to come up here.
Oh yes, I'm telling you, this is Warren Commission discussions here. This is intense stuff.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment, and I'll remind everybody to press the participant button and check the appropriate box. But before we do that, we want to introduce someone to make a few comments here of her own about Le Samouraï, a lady who's been a supporter of New Plaza Cinema from the very, very beginning. I know I met her way back then, and she continues to be a cheerleader for us, and in fact, a very valuable supporter. She is kind of the official sponsor of this program tonight. French cinema is her favorite, I believe, international cinema, and she simply asked us, find something good within the parameters of French cinema. I like Alain Delon very much. I love the Nouvelle Vague, the 50s and 60s. Otherwise, just go for it. Her name is Claudine Baker, and she's going to come on right now and say a few things, and then we'll go to the questions.
Claudine, would you please start your video?
Okay.
There you go.
There she is.
Excellent.
Well, I want to thank you for just taking on one of my favorite films, and I think it's because he was so handsome, aside from his acting. But after watching Le Samouraï, we film lovers have discovered that we can always learn something new about our favorite films, thanks to our film experts, Gary and Max. And I hope that more of us will become inspired to support this new venture that New Plaza Cinema is starting, the Classic Film Talk. So onwards with more wonderful talks, movies, and anything else that you all come up with. It's my pleasure. Merci.
Merci, Claudine.
Thank you, Claudine. This has been a great week, and you're responsible for it.
Well, thank you. I like that.
We're very, very grateful. And you mentioned Alain Delon's attractiveness. That was one of his challenges as the 1960s was wearing on, because he was having a difficulty shaking his pretty boy image, even though he was appearing in these films by Visconti and, of course, Melville and René Clément. He was still being thought of as this pretty boy, but he kept plowing ahead and taking on difficult parts going forward.
Thank you, Claudine. Guys, where'd you go?
Oh, I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Zoom turned us off automatically.
Oh, okay. Gary, can you come back? And we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
A couple of questioners. So we're going to start with Marjorie. Marjorie, would you please start your video?
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Hi. I just want to say how much I enjoyed and got out of this film. It was really fantastic. I think I could talk for hours about it because there's so much left unsaid, which is what I liked. So I'm a photo enthusiast, and I am a wide angle close-up person, which this film was filmed in, which I think was brilliant. And I just thought the putrid green that permeates throughout this film, inside, outside, everywhere, and there were no shadows, no lights, uniform luminosity, just fit the characters' emptiness and stoic personality so well. And that's such a perfect match of the story, the characters, and how the cinematography worked together on that film. It was just amazing to me how that was done. And another point that I noticed, when it opened, he was lying there in this barren room with just the bird. And it reminded me of Shadow of a Doubt when Joseph Cotton was lying there.
That's great.
Well, Joseph Cotton obviously was making lots of money murdering these women. He, I'm sure, is not committing murder for a 5 spot. He was probably making a lot of money. And look at how these men chose to live with the bare essentials of nothing, which I just think it showed their emptiness and their total lack of caring about life. So they were able to commit these murders without any consciousness, except for him at the end, where he doesn't choose to kill the pianist for many reasons. So I just thought that was it, and how that the cinematography just grabbed me, of how it fit the characters' personalities.
It's beautiful observations, and you talk about the decrepit apartment dwelling that Jeff was in. It also gave me a sense that he was not counting on staying at that location very long, that it's a transient dwelling that he has to prepare to flee at any time if the law is in pursuit of him, or even if his employers are in pursuit of him.
Yeah, that's a good point. Probably
another observation.
Yeah,
but
probably the same with the Joseph Cotton character too. He had to make it out of there anytime. But those two similarities just really struck with me. And one more point, if I can use up a little more time, I had the idea that the pianist was the head honcho in these murders, or involved in them in some way. That there was a menage a trois, business, sex, with these other two, with Marty, the person who was murdered, the other guy she was living with and her. She did away with the other two, and now she's got the whole business. I don't know. Just a thought.
It's a sensible one. I felt that there was something more that we didn't know about her. She was up to something.
Oh, definitely
up to something.
Yeah. And I mean, what she was up to can go on for hours because there's no answer to it, and that's what makes it so fascinating. But when she refuses to identify him, when she knew it was him, gave me a clue she's got to be in on it.
That's another moment that I think even we kind of undervalued that Max.
Oh, totally.
Trying to fix things out.
Once again, I'm approaching this from the superficial American moviegoer. Oh, she didn't identify him because she's attracted to him. Obviously, there's more going on here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marjorie. I want to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. And if you do want to ask a question, please hit the participant button and raise your hand. Next, we're going to go to Daniel. So Daniel, if you could turn on your video, please.
There we are.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Two things. Number one, I'd like to put in a plug for another Melville film with Alain Delon, which is one of my favorites, Le Cercle Rouge, The Red Circle, which is more of a heist film than a lot of the other Melville things, but it's hugely entertaining. And I need to go back and see it again. It's been quite a few years, but I much admire that and would recommend it.
Fantastic cast. And Yves Montand and Guillaume Maria Volante in addition to Alain Delon.
Yes.
It's a terrific one.
I also want to recommend a book, which is brand new, by David Thompson, a well-known film writer, called Murder and the Movies. And I'm not quite finished with it yet, but he sets up an interesting sort of triangulation of interests. If you have a murder on screen, you always have a killer and a victim. Sometimes law enforcement has an interest here, but he takes us through the fourth wall into the viewer. And most of us who watch films like this have never witnessed a murder in real life and would be appalled if we did. But we seem to fall into a certain mindset when we're watching a murder on screen. And this movie really provoked me to think a lot about how I react to watching a professional assassin blow somebody away. Part of it is because I'm fascinated by Jeff's professionalism, that he seems to do everything right, every detail perfect. That is fascinating in itself. Do I really want him to commit these crimes? I don't know. I'm kind of torn, and maybe that's the point. But I would simply toss that question out there for all of us to think about. How do we react to watching Jeff kill people?
You know, and here we go to the debate about the narrative. When he goes and kills that nightclub boss in the beginning, I was shocked by how loud his gun was, because it was certainly loud enough to be heard by others. We see the pianist walking in the corridor, and my initial reaction was, well, certainly she must have heard the gun go up. I didn't know, as none of us did, that she probably knew there was going to be a murder taking place. But so I guess I was more fascinated by not wanting him to commit the murder, but how was he going to do it, and how was he going to get out of there? And he had this totally lackadaisical, like a professional. He didn't panic. He just walked out of the piano bar like a professional would, because I was curious to know how he was going to get away.
We're fascinated by his methodology.
Yes.
And since there is so little emotion involved in his profession, we're kind of watching with deep fascination to see what he's going to do next. And I really enjoyed it. So that's all. Thank you, guys.
Great observation.
Thank you. Yes, terrific.
Because Hitchcock once said in a British TV interview that movie audiences are always rooting for the transgressor to get away with the crime when they're watching like a break-in or a burglary of some kind. I thought that was fascinating. Because you're so caught up in the tension of the moment.
Thank you, guys. We have a couple people raise their hands and lower them. So if you, again, want to ask a question, and there's a lot of questions in the chat, maybe we can get some hands from there. But Christy, if you would please turn on your video.
Okay,
Oh,
I'm so dark.
we see you.
I just had a comment, but before I make my comment, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the bird, who I was so completely mesmerized by, especially in one scene when she seemed to be reacting to the stress of Jeff. It was extraordinary. I wanted to say it's not a parrot, it was a female bullfinch, and they're gray. And I read that Melville wanted that opening sequence to be very gray and dark, and the bird went along with the decor. But I really felt the bird deserved an Oscar. I mean, he was just really extraordinary. So just the other thing I wanted to mention, and maybe it's kind of a silly observation, but Melville, he was Jewish and he fought in the resistance, and he did make a movie, Army of Shadows.
Army of Shadows.
2 years later, but I was wondering whether or not his war experience informed this movie, playing the samurai, sacrificing your life, really having to play by the rules and very strict to destroy the enemy. And I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts about that.
I'd love to hear what Gary has to say. I can't imagine being in Paris during the Nazi occupation and being involved in the resistance and not having that affect whatever artistic decision you make in the future in whatever genre of film you're working in. Certainly, I think there's something to that. And maybe Gary might have some thoughts as well.
Well, I haven't read this book in many, many years since I first started seeing Melville's films, but there's a great series, Max, and I know you know it. It's called Melville on Melville, where he's, part of, I think BFI, or this, now long out of print and much valued by film book collectors and scholars, in which he talks about his experiences in the resistance in his early life. You'd probably have to go to the Lincoln Center Library when it reopens and get the copy up on the third floor, and read it at your desk or something. But I think that would be, I'd like to do that myself now that we've done such a deep dive into this and find out more. That would be the place to start.
He's such a terrific director, and I've seen almost all of his films. And thank you for the opportunity to get to see the movie again and discuss it. I really appreciate it.
Christy, are you a sound editor? I'm wondering how you know the sounds of birds so well. It sounds like this is the type of thing that a sound editor tends to know, like car engines.
Photographer.
Okay.
But I was very intrigued by the bird. I wanted to find out more about it. So.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that insight.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's a shame about Melville. He died so young. He was only in his mid-50s when he had a stroke. He was having dinner with Philippe Labro, who was going to become a director in his own right. And he had been in the midst of planning a spy thriller with Yves Montand. And so he was taken from us far too early. But what he left behind was quite extraordinary.
Yeah. To become immortal and then to die. It was
exactly
ironically true.
Mm.
Natalie, and then we have Lee and Jerry on deck. Natalie, you have to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm wondering to what extent this movie is like a Rorschach test. Max, you said it's an intense experience to try to delve into everybody's motivations. And I'm wondering if it isn't the intense experience of every single viewer on his or her own. Has Melville written anything, in effect, kind of blank slate into which viewers will read? I know Hitchcock told Stewart to just have a blank face when he was shooting Rear Window, because he was sure that the viewers would just ascribe whatever emotions to James Stewart they deduced he was having from whatever was going on. And I just wonder if maybe Melville didn't really have a backstory for these characters. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, and it's Gary, you may have read more interviews with him about this film than I did, but
No, not necessarily. I mean, at the end, the thing that comes to mind when we talk about this is that Alain Delon would have made a great silent film actor if he had been around, right? Because he has the ability to give us so much with each of his close-ups, much as Jimmy Stewart does in Rear Window and Vertigo, where there's literally 200 or 300 shots of him in both those films, just looking, not speaking. And
well, they say acting in films, it's as much reacting as acting, and in a way, it's a benefit if Melville didn't talk too much about the ambiguities and the plot, because if he were to explain to us what happened behind the scenes of the narrative that we didn't see, would that take away our participation in bringing an interpretation to the narrative? I don't know.
It might have felt more mundane. The more
it might have,
yeah.
And
it would have, yeah.
Or because and I mean, Kubrick was famous for this by not being deliberately cagey about the symbolism in his movies. He didn't want to explain too much, and in a way that kind of keeps the mystique of the film alive.
Right. I was cured all right.
I was cured. That's from Clockwork Orange, right? But other than that, we don't know.
I think the director usually the director may have some cohesive idea of what's going on between the characters, some kind of backstory, or the actors may bring it into their work, but then don't show it. I'm wondering if in this case, possibly there wasn't.
It's a shame, it's a shame the interviews I saw, because on the Criterion edition, I have that somewhere, they have some archival interviews with about the time the film went out, and they did ask him about working with actors, but it was just a very brief thing where he said you have to be supportive and gentle with them. But he didn't give. I wish that they had pushed him a little more to especially about how he worked with Alain Delon. That would have been fascinating.
Well, he obviously he liked working with movie stars, and they like working with him. Belmondo, Lino Ventura, Yves Montand, Alain Delon, they all appeared in multiple pictures with him.
So he had a good working relationship.
Yeah, evidently.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Natalie.
Okay. We have two more questions, two more hands. So we're going to ask Lee to please turn on your video, and Jerry will be next and last.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen,
Bonsoir.
I happen to be, everything I happen to know about films, I know from you guys. So, because I spent a lot of time not going to the movies for whatever reason. But as an American watching this French film, I know that the bird is important. I got that. I know that the bird maybe deserves an Oscar. But in the scene where he comes into his apartment and he walks around and he doesn't look at the bird right away, he walks around and then all of a sudden he looks at the bird and he knows to look that the police were there. How did that happen?
Well, because first of all, the bird, it's not just a look, the bird is hopping around very anxiously in the cage. And it's a marked difference from its usual behavior. He does it twice.
The guy was hiding in an
He's doing it. The bird is doing it after the policemen are there, and he's doing it after the blonde gangster type shows up and hides. So he's responding to the bird's movement in the cage.
And I think we have a bird owner who's texting us that there are extra feathers on the floor of the cage. Which,
there you go.
I certainly didn't notice, not being a bird.
Well, I saw the extra feathers.
That was when the blind
But like a dog knows when its master is coming home. Does a bird know that he's coming home? Just a question.
No, but it was a great image. It was a great ingredient to the story.
Yes. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Claudine, as well.
Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Lee.
And we're going to get Jerry, and actually we're going to fit in one more questioner after Jerry. But Jerry, if you would start your video, and then we're going to go to KB and then close it out after that. Jerry, go ahead.
Okay. Am I on yet?
You are. We see you.
Okay, great. Pretty dark, but you really don't need to see me.
It's a film noir look. That's good.
Exactly. First, I want to thank you guys for these sessions. They're really fantastic because usually I'm oblivious to what goes on in a movie, and it really makes a big difference. Lee brought up a lot of stuff about the bird, which I was just going to ask. Those little molting feathers, or the down feathers, I think, showed a sign of stress on the part of the bird. So that, I guess that was a clue that something was going on. The other question I had was, in the beginning of the movie, Delon was wearing a very light or tan trench coat. And then at some point, I'm not sure exactly when, he switched to a very dark one. I'm sure that has some significance that you can shed more light on than I can.
I throw the ball to Gary.
Well, we talked about this week as we were kind of rehearsing and, chewing over things. And I think somebody in our group had an answer to that, and I'm not remembering it at the moment, unfortunately. Why he changes coats.
Well, I recall people wondering. The question is, did he change? And this is something I can't recall, whether he changed his coats right before the first murder or the first hit that he made at the nightclub, or did the coat change occur later? That's something that I can't answer off the top of my head.
Later.
But you can't help but feel it's a symbolic costume decision, deliberate.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he started out with the light-colored raincoat, definitely when he went for his hit assignment. And maybe the dark raincoat indicated that his life had become darker and more ominous. Yeah.
I think that's a fair assessment. And just the two touches that I just loved that were deliberate, of course, was when he put on his white gloves before committing a crime. And then no matter what happened in the apartment, he always had to check out the visor of the hat in the mirror.
Always adjusting the hat ever so
always had to look good before he went out the door. Those were beautiful touches.
It was great.
I think someone else here has a theory about the coat we may be hearing momentarily.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay, our last question is coming from KB. KB, if you could start your video, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, well, it was my theory about the coat that he was actually preparing to die, and that was going to be his funeral outfit.
Oh.
I actually think he knew he was going to die, which is why he saw Jane at the end, right? Going around sort of paying his last respects to her. But anyway, I wanted to ask a couple of things. One is, he goes into his apartment and he has something and he hides it in the fireplace, and I couldn't figure out what it was that he was stashing away in the fireplace. And then the second thing was, I don't know what motivates him. I mean, he does his job very, very well, and he's constantly saying that he does it for the money. Like, he gets paid quite a lot, but it's not obvious what he's spending the money on. And so I think the police chief has it wrong, because the police chief suggests that the other gentleman is paying for Jane's lifestyle, but actually I think it's Jeff, and that she gets love and affection from the other guy, because she's not getting love and affection from him.
That's a very fair observation, I think. And there was another, you raised another question
about what I think is cash, a roll of like old francs that has been sliced or burned in half somehow, and he shoves that up into the chimney, and that's not clear exactly what use is that to anyone at this point, let alone him.
I know, exactly. I mean, it looked like money, but then it didn't look like money.
And then also, why would he accept the second hit from the blonde man who tried to kill him? You'd think he'd want to separate himself from that organization, but it's part of the puzzling elements of the narrative that it's maybe things we're not seeing that might explain some of his decisions.
Or an interpretation of the code of the samurai that, you never turn down a job or something, but I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. But we are definitely in agreement that that opening quotation is bogus from Le Bushido, Le Livre des Samouraï.
That seems to be the consensus.
Okay.
And some of our viewers may know there was a remake of Le Samouraï in the late 80s, a well-known Hong Kong gangster film directed by John Woo, The Killer. And that John Woo had this terrific, veneration for Le Samouraï, and I think he dedicates the film to Melville. And the body count is about 250 higher than Le Samouraï. But if you have the stomach for it, it's a beautifully made film in its own right, sticking pretty close to the story.
Good point.
Great, that's the end of our questioning. We'll ask Sean to join us. You're good, Sean.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. Okay, good discussion, great movie. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So a couple of things coming up, but before I do that, I want to one more time just thank Claudine for sponsoring us. And you will get more information from us, but if others are interested in a potential sponsorship, of course, we're always willing and able and excited to talk about that. So let us know if there's something you're interested in. And you can do that by reaching out through Eventbrite and just responding to the host, and I will get that and pass that information along. Or you can go to our website and contact us through our website as well. So you can try to do that. We have our next two events coming up. We have our event on September 30th, which is our next lecture that Max is doing us, and it was a very good year, 1946. So we're going to have a discussion and lecture from Max about the films of 1946. There were many very, very great years of films, and 1946 was one of them. So we will talk about that in a second. We're going to show a little taste of that so that you can see what we're talking about. And then on October 4th, we're going back to Sunday afternoon for our talk back discussion. And the movie that we're going to show from 1946 is My Darling Clementine. Very excited about this because it's a Western. We haven't shown a Western, and certainly that was an important, very important film genre. It's a Ford film, and so again, an important director to talk about and discuss. And a couple of my favorite actors are in this: Henry Fonda, Victor Mature. So I think that's going to be a fun discussion as well, and that's on October 4th. But I would like to end here today to say goodbye. But as we're leaving, Max, if you can play the 1946 teaser, I think it would be fun for people to see that in the last minute or so.
Very well, here we go.
Thanks, and bye everybody. Thank you.
Hey, have fun.
Hey, Bob Reba. 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 Yes, my baby knows. Matilda Brown told old King Tut, say if you can't say Reba, just keep your big mouth shut, shouting, hey, Bob Reba. 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 Yes, your baby knows. Mom was on the chair, Pop was on the cot, baby's on the floor blowing his natural top, saying, hey, Bob Reba. Hey, Bob Reba.